Why does Gemini talk so much, yet still feel misunderstood? Why do they shift interests, identities, even relationships so quickly? And why does commitment feel thrilling at first, then suddenly suffocating? If Gemini is so adaptable, so curious, so mentally free, why does staying in one place feel unbearable? If you are a Gemini, or if you've ever loved one, stay until the end. And if even part of this feels uncomfortably accurate, save it, follow this zodiac psychology series, and come back later, because Gemini's deepest fear hides in plain sight, woven into their words, their restlessness, and their constant need for movement. Gemini doesn't fear depth. They don't fear responsibility. They don't fear emotional complexity. That's the misunderstanding most people have about Gemini personality traits. What Gemini fears is being trapped. People often describe Gemini as light, social, fast-thinking, endlessly flexible. They're labeled inconsistent, scattered, unreliable, afraid of commitment. From the outside, it looks like Gemini simply refuses to stay, refuses to settle, refuses to choose. But Gemini isn't running from people. They're running from confinement. At their core, Gemini psychology is ruled by the mind. Thought is oxygen. Curiosity is survival. Ideas, conversations, perspectives, these are how Gemini feels alive. And somewhere early on, emotionally or psychologically, Gemini learns something quietly but deeply. Staying too long means losing options. Choosing one thing means abandoning another. Being defined means being limited. So Gemini adapts. They learn to move between roles effortlessly. To mirror the room they're in. To reinvent themselves depending on context. Over time, flexibility stops being a skill and becomes armor. Gemini keeps multiple versions of themselves alive because letting one die feels dangerous. Gemini doesn't ask, "Who am I at my core?" They ask, "Who can I be next?" This is why Gemini struggles with anything that feels final. Final decisions. Final labels. Final commitments. A single narrative that demands permanence feels like a cage slowly closing in. Even good things can start to feel threatening once they lose their sense of exit. Their deepest fear is not loneliness. Gemini can be alone and still mentally stimulated. Gemini's deepest fear is being mentally trapped in a story they can't escape. This fear shows up everywhere. In work, Gemini thrives in environments that offer variety, stimulation, and mental movement. They excel in roles that require communication, adaptability, and problem-solving. But when routines become repetitive or predictable, a subtle anxiety sets in. It's not boredom, it's panic. Panic that their mind is being boxed in, that their potential is being narrowed, that their identity is shrinking. In daily life, Gemini collects experiences the way others collect safety. Conversations, skills, interests, friendships, each one feels like a door. Gemini feels safest when they know they can leave any room if it starts to feel too small. But that safety comes at a cost. Because when you never stay long enough, nothing ever fully roots. In relationships, this fear becomes painfully complex. Gemini wants connection. They want to be seen, understood, mentally met. Gemini in love is curious, playful, deeply interested at first. They love the early stages of intimacy, the discovery, the questions, the feeling that anything is possible. But intimacy eventually requires stillness. Depth asks for presence. And presence, to Gemini, can start to feel like confinement. So Gemini talks. They joke. They intellectualize emotions instead of sinking into them. They stay mentally engaged while quietly keeping an emotional exit unlocked. Because beneath the charm and curiosity lives a quiet question Gemini rarely voices out loud. If I choose this, am I losing everything else? Over time, Gemini begins to notice something unsettling. They are always changing, but they don't feel like they're growing. New ideas come quickly. New interests ignite fast. New connections spark easily. But beneath the movement, there's a growing sense of disconnection. Gemini starts to feel like a collection of moments rather than a continuous self. They may look back at their own life and feel strangely distant from it. Who was I then? Who am I now? And why don't these versions feel connected? This is the quiet identity fatigue Gemini rarely talks about. When you adapt long enough, you start to lose track of what you're adapting from. Gemini begins to fear not just being trapped, but being hollow. They fear that if they ever stop moving, there will be nothing solid underneath. That the stillness will reveal a self that was never fully built, only assembled temporarily to fit the moment. So the movement continues. Not for excitement anymore, but to avoid the silence where this fear waits. This is when Gemini's restlessness becomes compulsive. They scroll, talk, multitask, think, consume information endlessly, not out of curiosity, but out of avoidance. Silence feels heavy. Empty space feels threatening. Because silence asks a dangerous question. Who am I when there's nothing to react to? And Gemini doesn't always know the answer. They crave grounding, yet fear being rooted. They want to be known, yet fear being defined. This internal tug-of-war drains them more than any external pressure ever could. Healing for Gemini begins when they allow themselves to sit with a new kind of discomfort. Not the discomfort of boredom, but the discomfort of presence. Staying in one emotion long enough to feel it fully. Staying in one connection long enough to be seen beyond the surface. Staying in one version of themselves long enough to realize it doesn't erase the others. Gemini slowly learns that freedom is not the absence of commitment. It's the absence of fear inside commitment. Identity doesn't disappear when you stay. It evolves. Even then, Gemini's healing is not linear. There will be moments when the urge to run returns. When curiosity disguises itself as escape. When Gemini feels the familiar itch to change direction the second things start to feel too real. And that's okay. Healing for Gemini is not about forcing stillness. It's about recognizing the difference between movement that expands the soul and movement that avoids it. Slowly, Gemini learns to pause without panic. To sit in conversations that don't need quick answers. To stay present even when the mind wants to jump ahead. They begin to notice something subtle but powerful. Staying doesn't erase their complexity. It gives it coherence. And in that coherence, Gemini discovers a new kind of freedom, one that doesn't depend on constant motion, but on trust in who they are becoming. Gemini doesn't need to stop exploring the world. They need to believe they won't disappear if they stay. And that belief is where real freedom begins.